presence is about intentionality, not geography. I would say kill it in its current form, which means I would reframe culture fit to culture add. Data only tells you the what is. You still need leadership, which means you bring in judgment to say what's next. An engineer who is no longer just writing code, because cloud code can write the code itself, but is thinking through in terms of end-to-end orchestration, experimentation, and design. Once you break customer trust, it's impossible to be here.
I will never be able to
sit down with someone when they're down and make them feel that all's going to be. I already know the answer 20 minutes before we're going to arrive, but I've learned to hold back, and that requires extraordinary patience and practice.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership Edge podcast with Rajesh. This is the original podcast for leaders. Hit subscribe and follow us on YouTube. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today, Mr. Sunil Gopinath. Sunil is the CEO of Albertsons Companies India, a Fortune 500 retail giant with revenue of over $17 billion. Sunil is responsible for driving retail transformation using AI, data, and engineering capabilities to improve customer experience. Prior to Albertsons, Sunil was the CEO of Rakuten India, where he was overseeing global technology and innovation for digital transformation. Sunil has also led multiple roles across companies like Flipkart, Qualcomm, and eBay. And he brings over 25 years of experience across retail, e-commerce, and digital platforms. Sunil is also a thought leader and has established philosophies such as boundaryless leadership. He's a NASSCOM GCC member, as well as an expert mentor and advisor to multiple startups. Sunil holds an MBA from the Haas School of Business, UC Berkeley, and a master's in computer science from Virginia Tech. Sunil, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rajesh, for having me. I'm really excited. I've watched a few of your previous podcasts, very thoughtful, the product driven, of course, but has many leadership nuances around it, very diverse. So I'm really glad to be here.
Thanks, Sunil. So let's get right into it. So leadership is a sacred cow, and we often talk about leadership beliefs and principles. We live in very interesting times. There's so much happening at the same time: geopolitical conflicts, AI, etc. Right? And the phrase "banny" comes to my mind. Right, brittle, anxious, non-linear is what comes to my mind. So my question is, I'm going to throw up some leadership beliefs at you. You need to tell me if you're going to retain it, you're going to kill it, or you're going to resurrect it in some new form. Okay, let's go. So the first one is great leaders need to be in the room where it happens. So before COVID, everything was in person. And then we moved to COVID and virtual became the new norm. And then we went back to RTO. And is leadership being in the room with your teams, especially with you leading global teams from Bangalore, to the Bay Area, is that still a must, or is that more of a footwall?
I would say keep it, but change the definition of room. What I mean is that presence is about intentionality, not geography. So my point there being, of course, leadership presence with the team brings in a sense of importance. It drives the right level of prioritization. It gives momentum when needed. But then I also don't think that it just needs to be like a mandate around physical presence, right? Because that intentionality matters more. And how powerful is your presence when you're actually present? Maybe I'm there in 2 out of 10 meetings that my teams might have on a regular basis. But when I'm there, and when I say I mean applies to any leader, is the value that's being driven in terms of the perspectives you bring in, a way you sort of model and reframe scenarios. The deep questions that you ask, does it change directions of the team? Does it give them much needed guidance, direction, prioritization? So be there when needed, but be all the way in is a lot more powerful than just being in the room just for the heck of it, right? And then you ask yourself, what is the point? So I would say, the purpose and intentionality is a lot more valuable than actual.
So what you're saying is be mindful, be fully present, which is a rarity these days in the age of distractions, and so that your teams kind of feel that, right? They know that when you're distracted, they know when you're being fully present. I think that's great. So we'll keep that. Hire for culture fit, right? This is a phrase that especially is very common in startups and scale-ups. I'm not sure where it exactly started, But the question here is sometimes that's just a mask for hire people who think like us. And that can create a herd mentality. And again, as somebody who's built and led very diverse teams, across locations, how do you see this playing out? How should we think about in the age of AI? How should we think about hiring for culture fit, or is that leadership? Is that something to be retained, or is that to be killed or restricted?
Very interesting question. I would say kill it in its current form, which means I would reframe culture fit to culture add. To your point, to me, culture fit sometimes becomes an excuse for groupthink. It becomes an excuse for becoming an echo chamber where you just want to hear what you would like to hear, right? Or conformance gives comfort. People who think similar, because to a certain point, it also reduces friction, so that brings in comfort, and therein lies the problem. For example, when I was at Rakuten, we grew from 100 people to 4,000 employees. If I had looked for conformance or pure culture fit, I would have brought in 4,000 versions of myself into the organization, and that doesn't move us forward. In fact, I would say that the most value, the most progress that has happened, whether it's from product thinking perspective, strategy perspective, execution, organization, has come in when you have a diverse mix of people who actually bring in a little bit of uncomfortableness into the room, right? People who think vastly differently, risk versus, say, stability. In an ideal scenario, you have, let's say a 50-50 of people who solve for risk, and which means they're proponents of risk, versus people who solve for stability and order and governance and conformance and things like that. So that balance can only come when you have multiple opposite forces that are pulling at each other, so that you can achieve some kind of an equilibrium. So I'm all for very diverse thinking. No, that doesn't mean you bring chaos into the system. Value-based alignment, the organization, to the company, to the team's charter is still very, very important. So for example, one values-based alignment is customer is first. The 5 principles of the company, customer is first, was ingrained into the fabric, which means listen to the customers, understand their pain points, do whatever it takes to make the customer succeed. These things are very, very critical and very important. Right? So value-based alignment versus thought conformance, two different things. So in other words, to make it short, I would say culture add is how I would reframe culture.
And shift it to value-based alignment, right? Rather than here's the 5 cultural attributes you need to adhere.
Yeah,
right? That's the way to look at it. Okay. So the next one is data-driven decisions are better decisions, right? So I think we've all come up through the school of data-driven decision making on a daily basis. There's culture to pour through reams and reams of data analysis, right? And with AI that's available to you at your fingertips. Is data-driven decision making still relevant in the sense of how fast things are changing? Or there's a saying that if you torture the data enough, it will tell you what you want to hear? Or is it a convenience or an excuse by leaders to propose what they want to propose? How do you see?
So I think the way I think about it is data is still very important and very critical, but data only tells you the what is. You still need leadership, which means you bring in judgment to say what's next. So I don't think we should use data to be a crutch, to postpone judgment, or to shy away from taking the risks that people need to take. I mean, I've never been in a scenario where almost everything has been data driven. Either the data is incomplete or you have hard timelines to hit. Pretty much 90% of the scenarios that I've been in, you have to go with a gut feel. You have to go from past experience, and you just get a feel. You talk to people, understand the scenario you're in. For example, all of the, let's say, the sales data, the conversion data, the performance data, or customer behavior data that we had pre-COVID completely vanished post-COVID, right? That data was not all useful. So you have to go with sort of new scenario planning. How are customers shopping? Like everything. The reason why e-commerce exploded post-COVID was because of the situation we all found ourselves in. So new data emerged, new experiences emerged, and we had to think differently, gamify differently, make it fun for people to shop. So I would say sort of balancing data with insights, with gut, particularly in this day and age where, AI is sort of the execution layer on top of data. It's already making sense of what the data is saying. It's telling you what the story the data is telling. Where leadership And humans come into picture is sort of figuring out what's next. Okay, what do I do next? I don't think you can replace judgment, creativity, and gut.
Yeah. So I like the way you said, don't use it as a crutch. Maybe use it as a catalyst, or supplement that with the human judgment, which I think will become even more critical with the AI. So I think that's a good way to frame it. Your people are the greatest asset. Every leadership book says it. Every leader swears by it. Again, in the age of AI, knowledge workers starting to get replaced. How much of a reality is this? Are agents your greatest assets now? Are still people your greatest assets? What will we do?
Fantastic question. So the way I would look at this is people are still assets, but the questions organizations are starting to ask, which people doing what and in what kind of org. So what I mean by that is agents, agentic AI, conversational AI, all of these things have eliminated friction with great extent in terms of doing a lot of research, planning, stitching data together, insights, content creation themselves. And so on. So I would say the value is going to shift towards AI enabled teams. So which means that goes back to my original question is what kind of people are important, but what kind of people are important is the ones that are a lot more enabled. It's someone who brings a 2.0 of themselves to the table is a lot more valuable to an organization. For example, there's a product manager who can build prototypes using Cloud Code is the 2.0 version of a product manager from a few years ago. Right? So that employee is a lot more valuable to the organization. Similarly, an engineer who is no longer just writing code because Cloud Code can write the code itself, but is thinking through in terms of end-to-end orchestration, experimentation, design, is validating assumptions, is using AI to build use cases. So you're becoming a super duper full stack engineer who can stitch the things end to end is a lot more valuable.
So hopefully talking to customers as well.
Yeah, talking to customers as well.
Power deployed engineers.
So I think that yes, people are still going to be our greatest assets, but the ones that leverage AI, the ones that bring the best versions of themselves to work, to the table, and are bringing multidimensional value are the ones that are going to be lot right.
So I want to double click on this a little bit, right? When you talk about bringing the best versions of yourself, responsibility or what role does the organization itself and the leadership have to play in this? Because in these days, like, we hear a lot about layoffs and we talk about non-essential roles being trimmed, etc. Well, that's happening on one side. How can organizations or how are organizations, including yours, helping people become their 2.0 versions of?
I would say probably a couple of different dimensions. One is enable people with the right tools that they can use to be successful in an organization. Believe me, it's not just cost. In large organizations, there's frictions around policies, governance, security, where organizations just can't let people loose with any and every tool that they can get their hands on. I mean, if I'm a 10-member startup, it's a very different story than if I'm a multi-billion dollar corporation with existing significant businesses at stake, customer data, privacy, everything becomes a lot more complicated. So what I mean by enabling is it's not just the budgets around these tools, right, that you want to give to to start using, but it also putting the right frameworks in place so that you can remove friction around this. So that the data is secure, governed policies are in place so that they can actually run these AI tools on company data. Otherwise, these engineers are not going to be asking Claude what the weather is today. They're going to be trying to understand what is my customer behavior? How can I personalize my algorithm better? What's a better personalization algorithm that's out there that I can use? And that's a better version of what I currently have. So that is second thing. And the third thing is encouraging people to actually leverage AI in ways that it's very visible. The value is visible. What I mean by this is, today we are asking product managers, hey, don't just tell me what to build, show me. Show me. Yeah. A prototype it's just that it contextualizes things for everybody. I can experience what the user is about to. For example, let's say you want to do something around creating a grocery basket for a party that you're hosting for your child. I can come in and write a dry spec that says ability to add products to basket, ability to be under budget and think about adjacent products because it's not just the food that you're going to get for the party. plates and spoons and so on and so forth. But if I build a prototype where it shows a family coming in and ordering this, how thoughtful the AI can be, what the experience look like, how is it removing friction? Maybe the people ordering it did not even specify the budget, sort of conversationally weaving that in, just being able to experience how a user experiences this through a prototype or even a working demo. I mean, these days you can just put together the live conversation, real customers. So I think just the ability to experience it will contextualize a lot of things. And it just makes everybody sort of emotionally connected to the proposition. So that's how I would say a new age product manager.
Yeah, I think a couple of things you said that resonated with me. Like, one is CEOs are asking, where's my ROI of AI?
Yeah.
And to the extent that the impact is visible or tangible, then those questions, I think, they receive, right? And the second thing is, a lot of times we get everybody in our organization access to Claude or ChatGPT, but then did we intentionally remove the friction points around data, around security, around governance, and so that our IT teams and InfoSec teams are not breathing down the necks of engineers, developers, and products, saying, why did you do this and why did you do that? So I definitely see a disconnect, right, in terms of how organizations are approaching this, and also the metrics. Right? And a lot of times, I don't know if you want to touch on this. There's like, 10,000 lines of code, 400 hours of productivity. Are those the right metrics to measure when you're thinking about these things?
See, I have two sort of bookends of perspectives around this. You bring up a very good point. One of the things is you have to be careful around not just having activity metrics for AI, but actually value/impact metrics for AI. Otherwise, you're going to confuse yourself around what is it you're trying to measure and why. Now, that said, since we're still in the early stages, now, look, there are two velocities at which AI is moving. The velocity at which foundational models of AI, the tools evolving is a lot faster than the adoption, right? So you'll have to give it a little bit of time because there is going to be a lag between the velocity at which new models are being deployed to the velocity at which organizations, mid-organizations are going to adopt this successfully. Because, again, as I told you, enterprises are not running on public data. Google or the world's indexed data is not the data set that I'm running. I'm running on enterprise proprietary data. In many cases, it's just my company's data. So you just can't assume that, this velocity and this are going to tag along at the same place. So there is going to be a lag. So we have to be comfortable with that lag, point number one. Otherwise, you're going to get impatient and just, throw the baby out of the bathwater. Second point is that you need to have metrics around low-hanging fruits, which are sort of immediate gains. It could be simple things like productivity. In our own company, our legal teams, or finance teams, our people in supply chain. They have a lot of different problem statements that can, which are low-hanging fruits that can be solved by deploying AI tools. Whereas if you go into deep business-related problem statement, like how do I do route optimization of delivery trucks so that I make my deliveries more efficient, more fungible, more agile. That's a lot more harder, complex problems that requires a longer gestation period. There may not be the variety, the diversity and depth of data needed to solve it immediately. So those are sort of long haul proof points. So I think the organization needs to develop patience, develop metrics around what's low hanging fruit with immediate ROI and what sort of more longer haul ROI, but still keep a sort of positive approach so that you don't lose momentum, you don't lose patience, but you give it the time. You have 6 to 9 months for things to.
Pace of development of AI is what makes this so hard. Yeah, right. And I think maintaining that short-term versus mid-term view is key.
Yeah.
Okay. The other one is move fast and break things, right? So this is again coming from Silicon Valley. I mean, you've operated in growth environments at Flipkart, right, and other companies, and then Rakuten, you scaled it to where it is, Albertsons. Is that still the norm in your view, or is it with AI taking over the execution layer, as you highlighted earlier, is it time to relook at that?
I think that there's no one answer to this question, right? There was a time, perhaps, around the time frame when I was working either in Silicon Valley or Flipkart and so on, where absolutely, very fast, bring things was a was a great approach that served the purpose of exponentially growth. But I do think that it's a mistake to make that into a management philosophy in today's day and age. And the reason is recklessness cannot be a substitute for thoughtfulness. Today, with the AI tools, I can run simulations with variety of use cases, variety of data sets, run multiple experiments in parallel, and I can learn fast.
Hey, Sunil, one of the leadership principles, through the whole startup era has been move fast and break things, right? And you've been part of growth organizations and scaled organizations, be it, Flipkart and Rakuten. How do you see that in the modern context, especially with AI, where things are changing so fast? Does this paradigm still?
I think this is one of those paradigms that you have to kill it and do a proper buy-in. And the reason is, see, there was a time where there was enough room and space for the angry young man where, move fast and big things, was a luxury we could afford, but not when your business is at $100 billion of revenue and growing. Because there is also various other methodologies that available now that was not available before, right, a decade ago. Because what happens is when you just move fast and break things blindly, is it becomes a paradigm for recklessness that's disguised as recklessness, which is basically impatient disguised as boldness. It's that's not a quality that bold school anymore. Because yes, building calculators still matters. Be thoughtful still matters. Innovative in how you do growth hacking, business growth expansion, all of that still matters. But without necessarily having to break things. I mean, the AI tools that we have, experimentation, we have we just pick what variables are going to measure in experiments. And I can, in fact, simulate it without even running experiments.
So basically, you're saying learn before you break it.
Absolutely.
That capability is there. It's funny, you said $100 billion scaling, and then you said breaking. And the first thing that triggered my mind was the recent Amazon outage, right? Because of, again, supposedly AI tools. We don't know what the real reasons are. And I was thinking e-commerce giant trying to move fast, trying to cut costs, and then unleashing all these AI tools with engineers. And they've had multiple outages. And these outages are like massive in terms of their customers and customers. And
once you break customer trust, it's impossible to regain, or it's going to take a long time to reach. So I think we'll need to find a balance between innovation versus learning more, and the two can coexist. Learning, trying out different things is a very different paradigm than making things for the purpose of learning. So I would separate out those two.
And AI makes trying things in a simulation kind of an environment that much easier. So there's no reason for you to go and break stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, we'll move to, putting leadership itself on trial, right?
Yeah.
And these are things that leaders will say in private, but never publicly. So we'll put you on the spot here and ask you, tell me about a time when you led with conviction and you were completely wrong. And what is the lesson you learned?
I think I'll go back many years ago in terms of, I was working at Qualcomm a decade ago. And one of the big problems we were trying to solve for was indoor navigation. The reason was, of course, the business case was very clear. Not people wanted to navigate. GPS had been unleashed externally, meaning navigate in roads and car navigation, things like that. It had unlocked so many different business opportunities for location-based services, mapping, shopping, so that nature. But indoor navigation was supposed to be the next frontier. Right? And I'm talking 12, 13 years ago. Finding the actual store location inside a big mall, for example, right? To finding which train you're going to catch in the Tokyo subway station. I don't know if you've been to Tokyo, but you can see how crazy Tokyo subways can be. It's multi-level subways and multiple, terminals within the same station, multiple trains, multiple platforms. So how do you even get to the exact train and the platform that you want to get to inside subway station? Things of that nature. That was the next frontier. So at that point, we were like, we had a partner, we had multiple customers. So we were like, this can be really solved.
Right.
The mistake that we did was we looked at this as an engineering problem, purely a systems engineering problem that had to be solved. We were very aware that GPS does not necessarily penetrate concrete and steel. It doesn't penetrate, deep underground. So we were like, hey, we use all kinds of sensors, accelerometers, gyroscopes. You also needed to use pressure sensors because barometer will tell you, even in deep subways where you have multi-layered subways, how deep you actually are. Are you in basement number 5, 4, 3? So yeah, from an engineering perspective, prepare. But I think the learning was that unless you actually live and experience the way a user actually goes about their lives, just go. Some people don't even go there for taking a train. In Tokyo, people, it's actually the shops in Tokyo subways are as good as they are in a mall. They have some unique, shops there as well.
Most people take the train.
People take the train. People just go for shopping. They go to restaurants to have food. They keep going between different floors with different basements. So we underestimated how difficult it was to crack that problem. The technology itself, again, this goes back to the previous question, which is build fast and break things. I don't think we anticipated how complex the use cases were, how complex the constraints were, and how seamlessly the solution and elegantly it had to come together to make people actually adopt it, right? You can't do a half-assed job out of it, as in, yeah, I used all of these different tech to get you to maybe basement 2, but after that, you're on your own because I've reached the limits of how much I can push the boundaries of technology, right? So, and to be honest, it took 15 years since then to solve the problem. Today, when I go to Tokyo, and I was just there last year, I can actually go to basement number 4 seamlessly without losing the location at any given point of time because it's switching between GPS to Wi-Fi to Bluetooth to pressure sensors to accelerometers to gyroscope in such an integrated way that I can now depend on this solution that it's not going to abandon me somewhere midway when it has reached the limits of what.
So was the mistake there that you didn't put yourself in terms of how the user is going to use it and put yourself in the shoes of the customer, technology?
Yes, I think it was a combination of it, right? See, when you're at the bleeding edge of technology itself at that point, I don't think you should take bets around enabling a very broad use case, such as indoor navigation. I mean, see, not only were we stitching the solution together, we were even pushing it on a gyroscope, a really functional gyroscope that can tell you orientation and things like that. It was around $100. And the challenge there was to bring it from $100 to $1 because the cell phone, selling price is not going to accept a gyroscope that's greater than $1. An accelerometer had to be 50 cents. A pressure sensor had to be 25 cents. So you're dealing with hardware, you're dealing with tech transformation where these devices were never inside cell phones, right? They're dependent, standalone devices. You're innovating on tech, you're innovating on cost, you're innovating on silicon, you're innovating on use cases, you're
all at the same time.
Stitching together everything. At the same time. Yeah, absolutely. For a Silicon Valley, this is classic innovation. But yeah, I mean, it could have been a systems engineering startup that would have been bought over by another company. Perfect use case. But for a consumer scenario that we were in, which was enable location-based shopping, the very fact that it took almost 2 decades since the time I was working on it for it to actually become live just tells me how much we underestimated or how optimistic we were or over-optimistic about taking the solution to market in a couple of years.
So the next one is a time you have to handle a tough customer and what it taught you.
Probably still going to Japan one more time for this. I mean, just really a lot of assumptions around management, leadership, thoughtfulness, human relationships changed for me working for a Japanese company. In fact, I would say Japanese have evolved management designs a lot more than any other place that I have go for or within. Simply because being a lot more aware of human nature, being accepting of reality a lot more is ingrained in the one of the cultural challenges that I deal with is, if we were dealing with a brand new product or some new technology, taking to market. And, when we go into discussions around budgeting, strategy, and so on, everything would just be fine. People would be like, yeah, we love this new proposal. Maybe it's for e-commerce, a new way of delivery, robot-based delivery, like that. Everybody would give a thumbs up and then nothing would happen. Nobody would move an inch on any of the stuff. our response to that would be to go back with more data, more strategic thinking, more use cases, as though the previous one didn't go well.
Mm.
And then again, we hit roadblocks with money. And then when I'm going to Tokyo to meet my counterparts, work with them, what my realization came was you hadn't really earned your trust to be at the table at all. But we had already moved ahead we had mapped it into a problem of trust with my data. The problem was there was no trust in me as a human being at all. When I say me, I mean us as a team, me as a leader. This was during the initial stages.
So who was the customer here? Was it the leadership or was it the board?
I would say, I would say it's it's the executive leadership of it. And I think this also applies to customers as well. Right? I can also relate this to other customers that we had in the past, which let's say Sony, Canon, and some of those other customers in there. What is the same underlying logic is going to be.
So establishing trust, establishing
trust and relationship is extraordinarily critical, not just because, it's not surface level trust. I think if you go to Japan, one of the learnings is that culturally from 1,000 years, it's the samurai culture, which is failure. If a samurai failed in a war and they would come back and commit harakiri,
Yeah.
it's the same DNA and thought process, which is the fear of failure is so entrenched that this whole let loose and break fast is just not a viable option in a company, in a Japanese company. It's not that they're not against innovation. It is, can I trust you that you have thought about all corner cases? You have been very deliberate and thoughtful about design. You have looked at all possible failure points. And are you realistic about your own constraints? The thing with Japanese, I told you to the last is, the reason why management is not science is that by default, they assume that things will go wrong. Because A, we are human beings. B, no one gets the luxury of unconstrained choices, budget, people, costs, natural calamities, or whatever it is, right? Changing customer tastes and behaviors. So unless you have baked those realist downside scenarios, they just don't trust you as a human being, which means you're this old over-optimistic, we will get this done approach that might work in a Western culture is seen as lack of trust. Is that you're not a realistic person, or you have just not dealt with reality long enough. And hence I have trouble believing your value propositions, because intellectually you're right. Culturally, realistically, you're wrong.
So it's an organizational subtext, right? In the sense that if you don't have the trust, the relationship, or the way the decision making is, which
Absolutely
is top down, then you just forging ahead and saying, get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also a lot more nuance. It's, have you spent time with them, just going out, for dinners and drinks and getting to know them and their families, things of this nature, which build such a multi-layered trust that once they take a bet, it's a 10, 15-year bet. Now, why do I bring this up? I bring this up because understanding multi-layered nuances of an organization, could be a customer's organization, it could be your own organization, is extraordinarily critical to science. And most people miss this. They think it's all about the problem statement.
So it's black and white, right? Solve this problem for the customer and you're
absolutely. And these are situations where it's generational trust, right? This trust goes, once you build it, it goes for a decade. And missing it has extraordinary impact.
I would imagine it's similar in European context as well. Right? Absolutely. You work with customers in Europe. It's very much trust relationship, not just move fast and break things.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Sunil, so tell me about a time that you had to deliver bad news either to your leadership, your team, or your org, and how you went about it and what did you learn?
Yeah. So there was, in one of my past roles, there was a scenario where we had to make certain investments in building grounds of AI. Let's say it's around around text, video, and so on. And we had to take a call around building internal versus external. And there was a bunch of dynamics around cost, efficiency, personalization, our needs, things of that nature. So at that point, we took a call around building this sort of foundational AI models. And that it was a pretty sizable investment because it needs PhDs in deep learning, AI, Gen AI, so that nature. It's seeing a lot of investments in frontier research, GPUs, hardware, model stuff, all of that. And we quickly realized in about a year's time frame that A, the budget would overrun significantly, systems, hardware, and so on. And the ROI started becoming questionable, including the time lapse. And it also became questionable because that was the time where there was significant investments going into foundational AI models in the industry for
AI startups.
right, and so on and so forth. So you get to this crossroads where you have to take a call around, do I really need to build this AI model myself? There was the reasons behind why we did it was still sort of valid, but just not at the same intensity as it was a year ago. Things have moved so fast, foundation models, and the need to sustain this for a much longer period of time, sustain investments versus what's available, right? And they're just sort of fine tuning it a little bit. I mean, it goes back to, without necessarily being the same scenario, it goes back to kind of what DeepSeek did, on OpenAI plus, right? Not exactly the same situation, but the logic behind, can I just build on top of what already exists, for a fraction of the costs? And it was a very difficult decision because this is not a decision you're making at the beginning. This is a decision you're making midway, right?
After having made
Investments, hired the people, the talent, and so on. But it was a very hard call because, the moment of epiphany for us that we are not foundational AI people. We are rather users of AI for a business need, right? Trying to make my search more efficient, my personalization more efficient, applications. And so we had to take a very, very hard call of shutting that whole and informing all of those employees and the broader sort of voice as to why we are doing this. It was a very tough scenario. Right? I had to go get deeply involved in speaking to almost everybody that people, and it's not a very, very big team, so which means I personally speak to people. And I had to tell them that, hey, it's not that we don't believe in you or your talent or the innovation that you're doing the job so far, but this ain't sustainable anymore. And so we'll just have to shut this down and we'll look for opportunities for people in other areas. Now, some of them were pure play scientists, which means they wanted to build foundational models, so there's really no path for them in the company. Some of them were happy being builders, application developers. They were okay being on the consumption side as opposed to the production side of AI. So they were okay to switch roles. So yeah, I mean, that's a scenario. It was very, very, very hard.
Yeah. And I think I've seen scenarios where the leadership won't make that call because they don't want to be seen as, oh, I made a bad call at the beginning. So I'll just let it play out, even though everybody knows that it's just a bad scene. And the longer you let it play out, it's going to drain money, it's going to drain resources. People don't want to necessarily look bad, especially in these big bets kind of scenario. Right?
Yeah.
So it's a big bet.
But the authenticity in which you make those, have those conversations matters a lot. See, I'm still in touch with almost all those research leaders that were hired for that team. They're all in different companies in India, the US now these days, and they'll pick up the call anytime, I give them a call. So I think that authenticity matters a lot in scenarios like this, and your ability to help people move on in their careers, whether within this company or outside the company, that matters.
Okay, excellent. So we'll just shift gears a little bit, Sunil. So I'll describe 3 people who are listening to this podcast, real archetypes from our audiences. And I want you to coach them live. No frameworks, no leadership principles, but the one thing that you would say if you were sitting across from them. So the first one, this should feel like home for you, the GCC leader who's stubborn. So she is running a 500% capacity GCC in Hyderabad, India. The parent company and the HQ, they feel that she's competent. However, they see the GCC as a cost center. She knows her team has the talent and they can do product innovation, but she can't get the mandate. And she's tried often in many different ways. Nothing's working. What does she do? Not next quarter, but tomorrow.
So the way I would answer this is stop asking for permission to do what you need to do. To demonstrate your value and the permission will flow. Usually in these GCC scenarios, I think asking for mandate is often less influential than demonstrating what you're capable of, and the mandate just happens as just a matter of fact. Some of the best people that I've seen are a lot more nuanced in terms of understanding where the company's pain points are. What are some of the challenges your leadership team currently has on hand? Maybe they're trying to, let's say somebody is building an authentication system, or somebody is trying to build an observability tool or make it build an AI-driven observability tool, but they just don't have AI talent within the team to be able to build an AI-driven observability tool. So understanding where the friction points are, what products can add value, and just instead of sort of even having these conversations around how do you up level the GCC, what more can I do, blah, 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 just go ahead, build a prototype. And it's a lot more easy
With the AI.
with AI. Go demonstrate it. I think the inflection point in one of the scenarios I was dealing with recently with one of my folks in my team, I think she was really, really smart about this. When she went and showed a prototype, one of the leaders in, quarters basically said, how did you even know this was a problem that we were in? But she was so very well connected with the rest of the organization. And it's not hard, trying to find out, where are
The pain points, where the pain
there's
points.
also challenges an organization had, but she had ability to actually do something. I think that's the difference. So what I would advise this leader is find one problem statement that you are excited about, company really wants to solve but has not been able to solve. I just go demonstrate. And then when the intent becomes clear, when people are like, the bingo, aha moment that you really understood what I want, they themselves are going to say, hey, can you take this prototype and actually make it a production grade software for me? And that itself will evolve into a project or a product. So funding that follows through. I think it's good to try bottoms up is where I've seen it's been a lot more successful than waiting for top down.
Yeah. So basically, if I have to reframe this, stop thinking of it as an organizational mandate.
Yeah.
I have to innovate. Go find a very specific pain point. Be narrow about it.
Absolutely.
Go solve it, and in a way that you can demonstrate the value, and then work from there.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Here's another one, again, very topical of our times. The mid-career leader who's terrified of AI. He's 42 years old. He leads a team of 30 in fintech, leading fintech company, but he sees the writing on the wall. AI is coming for the layer of work that he does and what his team does. He's not whether to upskill, pivot, or just write it out. He never says this aloud to anybody. What does Sunil tell us? He's a people manager.
This is a great question. I mean, I think this is going to be applicable to most of us, as we look forward in trying to shape our career, our experiences, the value and so on. I think the very fact that this leader saw this coming actually puts him ahead of the game and not behind. Fear with clarity is not a weakness. It's the beginning of a strategy. What I would advise this leader is to not, and what I would advise myself is don't be at the back end of it, at the receiving end of things. Right? I don't want to be a victim of circumstances. I want to help shape the direction so that I'm ahead of the curve, which means, let me give you a generalization first before I sort of give a specific about it. When the calculator goes invented, it's not that all mathematicians become jobless. They're still around. They're just solving different problems. They're solving more complex mathematical problems using a calculator. That's the way I see the new scenario evolving as well, right? I don't see technologists, product people, innovators, thinkers, all becoming jobless. Absolutely not. I just think of them as they're going to migrate to solving more complex, more nuanced, more multi-layered problems where judgment, curiosity, strategic thinking becomes a lot more sharper. The operational tactical elements are just going to become
The execution layer.
So what I would advise this leader is be a proponent of AI, be the one that's seen as leveraging AI, solving problems, in how can you leverage it? What higher order problems can you solve, right? With AI. For example, if you were doing, let's say you're somewhere in fintech and maybe one of the things I'm pretty sure you would be solving is fintech related fraud, credit card
Anti-fraud,
and so on. I guarantee you, having done this before, 60% of how fraud is being solved is perhaps a lot more manual in fintech.
Right.
AI would be a fantastic tool to leverage for solving problems like fraud because it's great at pattern recognition in all kinds of ways. So perhaps this leader could become one that comes in and say, hey, I've leveraged AI to reduce payments and fintech fraud by another 20-30% because I've recognized these patterns a lot better, a lot deeper, a lot faster, and hence driving a lot more efficiency and cost. So I would advise him to lead from the front, to be ahead of the curve with respect to leveraging AI, being a proponent of AI, and be seen as someone who is elevating the game in his line of work than being at the receiving end of it and be seen as a victim.
Yeah, there's a quote that comes to my mind, right? Which is leaders put themselves in really good positions.
Yeah.
Right. And it's also a sports analogy, right? Do all the right things to put yourself in a really good position and then the magic happens, right? So, to rephrase what you said, rather than kind of wait and react,
Yeah.
put yourself in a good position, do a bunch of things and see how it then plays out. And I think this also ties to your previous answer, which is basically this agency. Take ownership, go solve a problem, show how you solved it, and then use that as a leverage, or to, but in this case, it's to shape your career. In the previous case, it's to get an organizational mandate, right? I think that's what you're touching.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great. The last question. So the young founder who thinks working relentless is a compliment, right? She's 29 years old, running a Series A startup in Bengaluru and has teams in the Bay Area as well. She works 16 hours a day. She calls herself bold and relentless. Her team is burning out. They're burning out candles on both ends, but she thinks it's the cost of ambition. Right? Glorifies hustle culture, and she wants to be Sunil 10 years from now. Will she get there, or is she heading for what?
Fantastic question. I think that this requires a very thoughtful deliberation. And the reason is I was this person 10 years ago. And I think the takeaway from this, and I'm no longer that person. And the takeaway for me is that relentlessness is mostly coming from an inability to let. It's the sense of control over your destiny and control over outcomes is so strong that it becomes relentless. And the reason, and again, extraordinary respect to founders, people who are being able to make those compromises, to hustle, get things done, get the startup up and ready. All of that is phenomena. Extraordinary respect for people who are able. But the challenge with this is that by behaving this way, you're essentially showcasing to your team and your organization is that this is the price of admission to be successful.
Price of entry, right?
In this organization and in this culture.
Control,
Yes, absolutely. And over time, this becomes unsustainable. I mean, no single person or founder can lead. They can, in brief sprints, can sustain this for a very long time. I've seen so many founders who have been burnt out in their 30s just doing this for a decade and just gave up after that. And it also doesn't allow you to scale the organization. I mean, at what point, if you're going to hire smart people who are equal or better than you in terms of what they offer to the table, leadership, execution, strategy, and so on, you're going to either expecting them to do similar things, you'll burn them out and then they leave, or you'll not empower them because they don't feel that they have the sense of they have agency to be able to do the things that are being hired for, because somebody up the chain is so relentless and in their face and behind their back that they feel suffocated. So they quit as well. So essentially, relentless becomes toxicity at some point. Right?
So it's not just the founder who's paying the price. Basically, your point is the organization that pays the price. People just leave.
So, yeah, I think I would say to that person is, yeah, you did a great job until now. Now it's time to let go. Build a sustainable organization under you and let that multiplier effect organically seep into this, or you'll still get the same outcome. It's just that you're not burning yourself out and that culture hasn't seeped in so that you burn everybody in your chain out.
Okay, great. Hey Sunil, so we're going to shift gears now. This is the fun part. This is the lightning round. We've gone deep. Now we're going to go fast. 10 prompts, short answers. Don't think, just answer in a few words as possible. The worst leadership advice you ever received that everyone else swears by.
You have to be the smartest person in the room or lead your team. That's the worst possible advice. Philosophy has always been hire the right people, the smartest people, and get out of the way.
One decision that you made in under 60 seconds that turned out to be the most consequential of your career.
So when a mentor called me up and said, when I was at Rakuten, that, hey, there is the opportunity for being the CEO of Rakuten in India and APAC. Would you be interested? I closed my eyes and said yes. And that was probably the best decision that I.
Okay. So when you're going to seat on a rocket ship, don't worry about which seat it is, just take it. Okay.
Yeah.
A leader you've never met but wanted in the room during your hardest moment.
I would say Satya Nadella. And the reason is, I think he's one of those leaders in whom accountability and empathy coexists. And that's a very, very hard thing to pull off.
All right. The one skill that got you to the CEO chair.
I would say believing in people and recognizing them and their presence and the value they bring in. I would definitely say that top the list.
So empathy, I can see is a pattern here. That's great to hear. You're hiring a replacement tomorrow. What's the one trait that's non-negotiable and it can't be bounded?
I think intellectual honesty. Told you about my experience with Japan in terms of their interest in finding out how realistic you are. And to me, it's the same, how intellectually honest you are about deliveries, execution, strategy, and how practical you are matters.
The last time you changed your mind about something because somebody junior told you that you were wrong.
Someone actually, multiple levels below in the organization came in and said, hey, all the KPIs you have is measuring activity and velocity.
Vanity metrics.
Is not value. And that made me reflect, and it made my resolve to push back on this AI for AI's sake adoption. It made my resolve even harder to push back on that.
Complete the sentence. This is a good follow-up to AI. AI will never be able to
sit down with someone when they're down and make them feel that all is going to be well.
or host a podcast together.
Yeah.
The book, talk, or conversation that changed how you lead, but has nothing to do with leadership.
I think this book is When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanti. He passed away. He was a neurosurgeon at Stanford. Just the value of time. I used to think of time as a management construct. Not necessarily now. I think of it as the most valuable resource that I have personally, professionally, and I'm a lot more thankful for it and very, very thoughtful about how I use it.
Okay, excellent. One thing you'd change about how GCCs in India are led today?
I would say definitely junk the fixation around cost as a value proposition and then replace that with innovation. I think if you create an identity around solving some of the biggest challenges and problem statements for the company, you just won't take off.
Yeah, and if you pivot on cost, AI is coming for you anyway. Finish this sentence. The next generation of leaders will succeed not because they are bold, but because they are
contextually intelligent. The leaders with the right context around market, customers, employees, the company are going to win over recklessness or boldness.
This is really interesting because in the context of AI, it's all about context. I'm glad to hear that. Sunil, final question. If leadership is a practice and not a title, what are you still practicing? And what part of this are you still working to?
See, I would say patience with pace is what I'm working towards or practicing. Why do I say? I'm somebody who has patience or high tolerance for strategic ambiguity, but I have very low tolerance for execution speed. It's a lot more, and the reason patience becomes a lot more important is because over time, I've come to the realization that, let's say the team is brainstorming on a particular area or a particular path to take. I may already know the answer 20 minutes before we're going to arrive at it. Or I may have a very strong point of view of how to get it done. But I've learned to hold back. And that requires extraordinary patience and practice. Because if you're not enabling your team to arrive at that particular conclusion or the path forward, you're short-circuiting the process and you're creating a less thoughtful team, which are really not going to be thoughtful about how to solve these problems on their own. And particularly with the advent of AI, where execution becomes just matter of fact, right? That it's just going to happen on its own. The main value that humans and leaders can bring to the table is judgment, clarity, asking the right questions, contextual intelligence. So to allow for that, you will have to be patient so that you just ask with the right questions. Let the things that need to happen, happen. Let AI play its part, let agents play its part, let your team members play their part, let the system play its part. But to make space for these multiple different analogous forces to come together so that the sauce that comes towards the end is really cooked. I think that's where value comes in. And so that's why patience with pace is something that I'm practicing on a daily basis because my normal sort of behavior is bias for action. And I'm supplementing that with patience.
It also requires, I think, leaders to be very centered and willingness to let go, right? Because if the leader feels insecure or need to prove their work, they're not going to cede control to anyone, right? So I think the growth of the leader is also important. The maturity of the leader is also.
But it's not that you don't have answers. It's just let the system come to the right conclusion. So to just be silent, to let things play out, and for the value to be cooked in a slow cooker, that takes
almost contrarian, right? So it's like meditation. Sit still, be still. And then it's kind of a contrarian view. I love it. So that's the end of our podcast. Thanks for being on the show, Sunil, and we'll see you next episode.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate this. You made me think a lot. So I appreciate the opportunity.